For some of you, a very specific line is playing in your head right now. For others, there's nothing at all. You maybe bye-bye. Both of those experiences are the same thing. Because when we talk about games like Super Mario 64, we usually talk like they're fixed things, they're defined, they're consistent experiences, but that assumption breaks quickly the moment you look at how players actually remember things. In the original release, this small moment during Bowser fights has become one of the most infamous and widely discussed ambiguities about this game. A compressed voice clip, technically just a simple line of dialogue, was heard differently by players. Not because the game intended multiple meanings, but because it just fully didn't control how that sound would be received. What matters here isn't the exact wording. You either know the clip, you don't know the clip, or you've gone and looked it up. What's important is what's formed around that. We, the players of games, fill in gaps. We repeat things that we thought we heard. We share them with one another, and over time, that interpretation stabilizes socially, even if it was not the intent of the author. It became part of how games exist in memory, not just in play. Later versions of this game remove the ambiguity. The audio is clarified, the misreading is no longer available, and something subtle has disappeared with that. Not content, but interpretive space. Not what the game says, but what it allows to be heard. This is where reader response becomes useful. Meaning isn't stored inside of a game, waiting to be extracted. It's produced by the act of playing it, in the same way that the meaning of a book is produced by the person reading it. And sometimes, that interpretation changes through memory, the act of remembering it. This Bowser clip is only one instance of this, but the same structure appears across Super Mario 64. When I first played it, I didn't think in terms of objectives or narrative structure. I just wanted to move through the game rather than complete it. And for a long time, I didn't even enter the castle. I just ran around outside in the courtyard, jumping, figuring out I could triple jump. I fell, I climbed things, I bonked my head, and tried everything I could. Just because of the sheer joy of movement. Because before the game becomes a system of goals, it's a system of motion. And motion's not only mechanical in this game, it's interpretive. How you move becomes how you understand space. Not what the game tells you about it, but what your movement implies. This is where the interpretation splits across players. A player encountering this game in the late 1990s is not experiencing the same interpretive environment as someone arriving decades later. Not because the code has changed, but because the language around it has. Early 3D games existed before the grammar, the language of 3D design had been stabilized. Movement was experimental. Camera control felt uncertain. Even basic navigation required learning how to think differently in space. Players had to build that grammar themselves. Later players arrive, and that language already exists. Movement systems are familiar. Camera logic is expected. Design conventions are learned before the game even begins. Anyone that's played a PlayStation-era 3D game where you had to rotate the camera with the L and R button know exactly what this means. Those same interactions that we had no problem with back then are read differently by a younger audience. What once felt like discovery is now registered as clunkiness. What once felt uncertain can now feel deliberate or dated. The game doesn't change, the player does. And in reader response terms, that difference isn't secondary, it's where all of the meaning happens. Because on the surface, this game is simple. Rescue Princess Peach, defeat Bowsers, collect stars. It has minimal structure. But almost no one remembers it that way because the structure is not where the meaning lives in this game. Meaning forms in how structure is played. It's how we move through it. Levels are accessed by jumping into paintings. Each painting opens a space that behaves like a self-contained world. But those worlds aren't singular experiences, they contain multiple possible paths. Stars act as progression markers, but also as a segmentation of attention. They shape sequence, not just reward. They shape experience, not just completion. And because players choose different stars in different orders, they produce different internal versions of the same space. The game does not enforce a single reading, it allows multiple readings to exist at once. And that's where meaning begins to loosen in a productive way. What remains afterward isn't structure, it's fragments. Sliding down the hidden slide, missing a jump and falling into water, chasing something across a space that only feels important in memory. These are not narrative events in a strict sense, they are meaning that comes through recall. What matters isn't that they happened, it's the memory that selected them. Because memory doesn't preserve evenly. It filters, it rebuilds, it turns experience into something coherent enough to carry forward even if it wasn't coherent in the moment. Which is why two people can describe the same game and not actually be describing the same thing. One recalls systems, one recalls feeling, one recalls motion, one recalls frustration, and all of them are valid because meaning is not stored in the game. It's reconstructed through use and memory and retelling. And even annoyance becomes part of that reconstruction. When I last played Mario 64, I jokingly commented to my brother that the real villain of the game was Yoshiaki Koizumi, the game's camera programmer. But before that playing, I'd either not realized or I'd forgotten how difficult the camera control actually was, because in play, it was also part of how the space was learned from moment to moment. The camera was just something that we adapted to. It was something that shaped our attention. And over time, that annoyance softened into nostalgia. It didn't vanish, it just became part of the remembered texture of the game, rather than its design, or in the camera control's case, the lack thereof. That shift from system to memory is itself, it's part of reader response. So, what does Super Mario 64 actually represent? It's not a fixed story. It's not a stable text. It's not a single designed experience, but a framework for you to create your own experience. A system that produces meaning through interaction, memory, and interpretation. The game provides structure. The player provides the meaning, and that meaning doesn't sit still. It shifts depending on when you played, how you played, what you noticed, what you misheard, and what stayed with you afterwards. So, when we return to the opening idea, that for some of you, a specific line is playing in your head right now. For others, there's nothing at all. That difference is not an inconsistency, it's the point. Because meaning in Super Mario 64 doesn't sit inside the game waiting to be found, it forms in the space between the game and the player trying to hold on to it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Super Mario 64 is one of those games that doesn't really stay fixed in your memory, no matter how clearly you think you remember it. It changes shape, it's amorphous depending on who's doing the remembering and where they're at, and that's probably where its lasting power comes from. And as always, I might not know you, but I love you. Take care.